So in your teaching, you talk about this idea of nominal group technique. That is a $10 word for a guy like me. How do you sum that up, and what are the benefits for it?
So nominal group technique, I want to be clear, I didn't invent it, but I use it a lot in my teaching and in my own entrepreneurship. It's detailed in my book. You can also just Google nominal group technique. It's a really brilliant approach to doing exactly what you just said, to creating a structured environment where everybody can feel comfortable to contribute in whatever way they are used to or whatever new way they want to contribute. And it tends to help people who are both introverts and maybe still very capable of contributing. I won't describe it in explicit detail, but in short, it provides an environment where you're doing some work together as a group, and we all can imagine why there's good confluence of or synergy of different thinking patterns, different experiences, where grouped together can work on a problem. But really important is to recognize that often breakthroughs don't happen with 10 people talking at once or working on the problem all at once. And so it also leaves time for individually people in the group to work on the problem. And so there's a little bit of time working individually, there's a little bit of time working as a group, and it tends again to appeal to both extroverts and introverts who are part of that diverse team that you've assembled around the table. So that's kind of a shorthand way of describing not so much the explicit detail of nominal group technique, but why it's so important. And my students use it every semester in their venture teams, and they rave about it, and they tell me how it's often what has been responsible for producing the kind of breakthrough ideas they have, leveraging both introverts and extroverts.
Yeah, that's powerful. I was in a recent brainstorm meeting, and one of the ways we did this was we had sticky notes. And instead of going, hey, who's got ideas? Start shouting them out. Instead, they said, hey, we're going to take 5 minutes in silence. You're going to write all the ideas on sticky notes, and then we're going to take them, we're going to stick them on the board in different categories. And then as a group, we discussed all of them. And so it gave those people who maybe need some time to process and don't want to be the loudest in the room, but they still were able to get their voice heard. And so that's, I think, an example of how the nominal group technique can be used in the real world.
It is. And that's a way of, again, engaging and including people from your diverse team who may not be the ones who shout the loudest. Often I find they're the ones who contribute the most. So there's a number of other strategies that, if it's okay, I'll just quickly mention, which are worth thinking about and are outlined in more detail in the book, and I think are really useful now that we've got a diverse and inclusive kind of environment. We've set the right tone by breaking our mental fixedness. We've established the ground rules so that some of the work you do is together in a team. Often, much of the work you do is, at least preliminarily, as an individual. Some of the adages that I would describe as a mental stretch to help you structure some of what comes next is one that I absolutely love is diverge before you converge. And this is often what people resist. There's a problem, there's a question on the table. People want to rush to solve it and be done with it. And as a result, they tend to be too narrow in their approach. And so I encourage everybody to diverge first and come up with all sorts of ideas that may or may not be feasible. In fact, the adage, again, that I attribute to my friend Bob Johnston is it is far easier to make an innovative idea feasible than a feasible idea innovative. And if you think about it, that makes sense. And so initially, when you're diverging, think of a lot of ideas because quantity tends to work in your favor. And don't worry about judging them against the criteria of, is this going to work? Do we have budget for this? Can the technology be advanced enough for us to accomplish this? Do we have the right people on the team? There will be all sorts of room for skepticism, but those often diminish the momentum you might have regarding ideas that on their face may not actually seem or be feasible, but might lead you to a breakthrough that you wouldn't see if you were too hung up on feasibility. And so that's, again, one of the problems I see in just sheer brainstorming. People have a limit on the way they think about these things, and they get too narrow too quickly. So diverge before you converge is definitely one of the most important adages to have in mind.
That's
A
strong.
second one is lateral thinking, which means it's, the adage is that you can't dig a new hole by digging the same hole deeper. And so sometimes people are constrained by, well, this is the way we do things at this company or organization. And so I'm just going to kind of try to expand or dig deeper in one narrow location. And instead, again, maybe consistent with the first adage, diverge before you converge, think laterally, move to different ways of thinking about the problem rather than just trying to dig deeply in one particular area.
That's good. You got any other strategies here? I love a good strategy. These are all brilliant. I'd be writing it down, but I'm focused on this conversation. I have to go back and listen.
Maybe a third one after diverge before you converge and think about lateral thinking is embrace wildcard ideas. And again, Bob Johnson and Doug Bate, who work in this field a lot with me, they often start off the discussion by saying, we want you to include at least one and maybe several ideas that are just on their face kind of crazy, ridiculous. The kind of ideas that you said before would get people to laugh. In fact, what they often advise people, somewhat jokingly, is come up with ideas, at least a few, that are immoral, illegal, or would get you fired. And I think that is probably good guidance. Not that they want you to break the law or do anything immoral, but they want something on your list that is on its face going to be absurd. And why is that? Well, it might be that on second glance, they're not quite as absurd as you think. And often those push the envelope ideas are really useful, maybe on their own merit. But even if they aren't the ideas that you pursue, they will push your thinking beyond your near-term limitations so that you'll embrace things that you might not have if you were just too conservative about the way you approach things. So when I assign my students to do this in the early stages of a course, in fact, my students this semester at Brown just did this, they came up with a portfolio of ideas to solve problems. I require that they have at least one and ideally several, again, wildcard ideas that are just on their face crazy and absurd. And it's not uncommon sometimes for students to eventually pursue them because they realize they're not quite as wildcard as they might have seen in the beginning.